Hello and welcome to this important edition of the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm specifically calling out this one because it is my honor to introduce to you a husband and wife team, some friends of ours, who have combined their backgrounds in astute digital marketing and branding with over 20 years of helping families deal with autism to create greater, more positive outcomes for both the children and their parents through a brand new, revolutionary digital SaaS platform. And you guessed it. Today you're going to learn how they are using storytelling to help expand and amplify the impact in the world they seek to make. I think we can all agree, regardless if we're parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, or just family friends, that we are looking for the children in our lives to live happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives of their own. But autism is on the rise, and some suggest in epidemic proportions. In 2021, the CDC reported that approximately 1 in 44 children in the U.S. is diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, and boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism than girls. And as doctors, clinicians, and therapists focus on providing better outcomes for the kids struck by autism, historically there hasn't been a ton of help for their parents, who often find themselves overwhelmed and undereducated on how to not just cope, but how to help their kids live fulfilling lives. That's where Happy Ladders comes in. The Happy Ladders promise is to expand your child's potential with its digital autism therapy platform. To ignite the growth of Happy Ladders, Sean Schroeder and Amy Jacobs-Schroeder summon the power of storytelling to elevate their impact in the world.
I've learned how to use storytelling in how I sell Happy Ladders to parents, how I sell Happy Ladders to organizations, and then how I talk about Happy Ladders in the event that we're talking to a potential investor. And those 3 stories are like similar, but very different. Having a framework for storytelling has been really helpful.
Amy Jacobs-Schroeder is the CEO of Happy Ladders, a SaaS-based parent-led autism therapy platform. She is also the author of The Parent-Led Revolution, a blog that you can read at parent-led.com, which started this whole thing. A mother of 5 and a runner, Amy has been providing autism therapy services for 20 years. She's a board member of the nonprofit Walk with Autism and a pioneer in the parent-led autism therapy movement. Amy said that she and her husband Sean have had to refine their story many, many times to speak to an audience that is not really familiar with SaaS-based solutions for autism therapy. The trick, she said, is to give enough story, but not too much. Sean Schroeder is one of the founders of Blue River, a digital design agency in Sacramento that created the Mira Experience content platform used by large iconic brands around the world. He and his partners orchestrated a successful exit from both the agency and Mira a couple years ago. He has 20-plus years experience building platforms and orchestrating the digital experience for startups, enterprises, and public sectors. He and Amy use technology to scale autism therapy beyond the one-to-one paradigm and empower parents to expand their child's potential, no matter where they live or what access to resources they may or may not have. You'll learn today how Amy and Sean have used storytelling to connect with overwhelmed, anxious, and worried parents who desperately want to see their child thrive, but don't necessarily know how or have access to the resources that will help them. You'll learn how they use stories to help health organizations deliver access to therapy at scale in an extremely cost-effective manner while delivering the same or better outcomes. And they'll share with you how they use storytelling to demonstrate the impact Happy Ladders can have in the world and in an investor's portfolio when raising equity-based financing. So please welcome to this important edition of the Business of Story, Amy Jacobs-Schroeder and Sean Schroeder. Amy and Sean, welcome to the show.
Hi, Park. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
It's so great to have you. I know, man, we have spent like the last 4 months trying to make this happen. So, number one, thank you for your flexibility, because we've had to start and stop on this interview. And I'm really eager to hear about the work you two are doing in the autism world, and how you are helping people, and how you're bringing play to that in your education modes, and how you're using storytelling to make it all work. But let's set the stage for our listeners. And Sean, it's going to start with you on this, because you and I go back, 5 or 6 years now, doing some work. In fact, you were here on the Business of Story and show number 121, as you and I were working through your brand story development for Blue River, the agency, digital agency you worked for at the time, and then your Mira platform, which I know you and your partners have since exited, sold. So congratulations on that. But with that, let me hand it off to you. Give us the backstory and all this fun stuff.
Wow, the backstory. Well, like you mentioned, my journey with storytelling began several years ago when Blue River, my agency, which I had with 3 other business partners, was struggling to communicate what we did, how we did it, and why we did it. Not just as an agency, but also as a product. We had a content experience platform that we had built, the outcome of our professional services work, and marrying the two from a storytelling standpoint was challenging for us, to say the least. It was challenging for us in how we communicated to our employees. They were constantly confused. It was challenging communicating to our customers. Sometimes they'd always say, well, we're a Mira customer. Like, what does Blue River have to do with anything? And so we'd have to go down that rabbit hole, right? And when you don't have the muscle memory for storytelling, it becomes quite difficult. So that was a big, big challenge for us. And that was one of the things that I thought was most fruitful out of our work together. Not only helping to define what our brand story was, which I thought was brilliant, and just learning how to do it over and over again. It goes back to, I was just thumbing through the narrative gym before our call here, just to refresh my chops a little bit. And it's true. It's you need to exercise that storytelling muscle in order to do well at it consistently. And the great thing is that the more you do it, the less you have to think about doing it. I was just working on a grant proposal for the NIH, and I literally went back after looking at the narrative gym, went back and started writing again. And so I was like, hey, look, there's an ABT right there, and I didn't even realize that I wrote that.
It's getting embedded. You're getting your narrative intuition just to come to you naturally now.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's great. And we had, it was your branding work was a little tricky at first. You and I explored a lot of different things, and then we really did land on that brand narrative that we both, I think, fell in love with and worked well for your team. And again, for those of you listening to this show, if you want to hear a more in-depth story about how that all came together, listen to Sean's appearance back on show number 121. But after you got that dialed in, you worked for Build It for a couple of years, and then you guys ended up exiting, right? You sold the Mira platform, or did you sell both the agency and the platform?
Yeah, we sold them both. We stumbled into an acquisition opportunity, and we took it.
Good for you. Congratulations. And that has now kind of propelled you into your next journey with your wife, Amy.
Correct. Yeah, it was something I knew that I didn't want to do content management, content experience for the rest of my career. So it was a great opportunity to pivot. Amy and I had found some overlap in the things that we do. The behavioral side of marketing, was obviously, there's a big component there, as evidenced in your recent interview with Nancy Harhut. But as we were working through the brand story for Blue River and Mira, I would come home and share have these conversations with Amy, and realize that a lot of things that she did in her field overlap a lot with what I was doing, not just from a marketing standpoint, but also just from a product design standpoint, product experience standpoint. And because there's all these behavioral sort of economics that are baked into things, that once you realize that, you're like, oh, okay, we're talking about a lot of the same things.
Enter Amy. Amy, welcome. And
Thank you. Hello.
What is your backstory? I know you have spent, a couple decades working with autistic kids and folks and have had some good success with that. Share with us your backstory and how this is all coming together.
Okay. Well, I'll share my story. Sean's had me working on that for a couple of years now. So yeah, I started in the field, as an entry-level tutor when I was in college and fell in love with it and worked for a local agency here in Sacramento for many years. And I, without getting into the weeds too much about my field and kind of the type of therapy that is common for children with autism, I was finding through my work that I wanted to explore a more play-based approach to autism therapy. It historically has been more structured and a little more rigid. And especially for kids that are recently diagnosed, they might be 2, 3, 4 years old. And I really wanted to explore if we could get the same results through a play-based approach. And also, typically, parents were kind of left on the sidelines. And so children, get an autism diagnosis and parents sign them up for all of the recommended therapies. And the therapists come in and they a lot of times take the child and start working on the child, and the focus is on the child and the focus is on training all the other team members that are involved with that child's therapy. Meanwhile, parents are sitting on the couch in the back of the room. They might not even be in the room. They might be in a separate room of the house. Or parents might be dropping their child at a center and they don't see therapy at all for the, 3, 4, 5 hours that their children are there. And so I really wanted to look at if we could bring parents into the fold and really incorporate them from the get-go. And what would that mean for them? What would that mean for how their child's therapy looked? And so long story short, Sean and I had the opportunity when I exited my agency. I had what we call a parent-led agency for 14, 15 years here in Sacramento. And I was able to exit that in 2021. Right around this time that Sean was available to help me launch this next venture, which is Happy Ladders.
So you were, I guess, sort of counteracting an older way of working with autistic kids, where was it very, very regimented? I mean, what was it about it that didn't feel like it was working for you? And how did you come across this concept of more play-based education and development?
It's interesting. So I wrote an article about this. So Sean had me, before we even had the idea for Happy Ladders, during COVID, he had the idea for me to start writing a blog. And he put this beautiful website together for me and branded it all. And we started to create this story, right? And I don't even think we realized that we were writing a story when we started the blog. It was kind of a COVID project, and I was still, very much involved in my previous business, and Sean was still working for his. It wasn't until we started to have our own children. So we have 5 kids, and our youngest is 4, our oldest is 18. And when our 18-year-old was a toddler, I was working full time, and I would come home in the evening and watch how she learned. And she was learning through play. And I thought, if she can learn through play, I have to be able to figure out a way to do this for my clients, because I was going and working with clients during the day who were her same age. And I was teaching them by having them sit at a table and do multiple, kind of structured drills. And that started to feel really unfair to me. And I think that's at the point at which things started to pivot. So really just becoming a parent and feeling more compassion for the kids that I was working with, as well as their families too.
Mm-hmm. So what is Happy Ladders?
So Happy Ladders is it's an autism therapy platform. And it's a mobile application that parents can use. It's what we call parent-led, meaning that it's written in a way that parents can access skill assessments and lessons and activities that they can do with their kids we avoid things within a parent-led approach. We avoid things like big terms and lots of scientific studies and, teaching modules and all of that. We try to give parents exactly what they need in that moment to help their child in, just a very basic format. We really look to kind of demystify all of the science speak, if you will, within the field. And so Happy Ladders is a platform where parents can access their children's developmental skills, figure out kind of where they should be working, and then the software directs them to lessons and activities that they can do with their kids in pretty minimal time at home and in the community, and they're play-based and they're fun. We also have a parent community within the app where parents can ask questions. I just answered a few great questions this morning before we hopped on with you. Parents can celebrate their child's success. So as they master new skills, they can share it with the parent community and the professionals on the app. Then we also provide live coaching where parents can get on with me and with other parents and also do the same thing, ask questions, celebrate success, and talk about specific topics.
I think what we're trying to accomplish for parents is similar to what Randy Olson has done for the scientific community, right? And that taking this very jargon-heavy language and turning it into a story that parents can instantly understand with absolute clarity and know what to do for their child that day.
So it sounds like, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, you came from this world of this regimented training, development, didn't seem like it was working as well as it could, while the parents were parked off to the side, sitting on the couch, watching all this go down. And now you've made the parents a very active participant in it, and it's play-based. So you've simplified it for them as far as avoiding all the jargon. And Sean, like you said, making these very complex concepts much easier and simpler to digest so that they can have a real immediate impact on their child. But they are very much of an active participant. We're using your mobile app at home, out in the community, but then I would imagine their kids also still may go to a resource center or somewhere else to get continued development.
Yeah. So we attract parents who are maybe on waiting lists. So, waiting lists, unfortunately, are a huge issue, especially coming out of COVID. The rate of autism diagnosis has increased pretty dramatically, especially over the last 5 years. And so there are a lot of kids and families waiting for services, and the waiting lists are long. So we're targeting families that are waiting. But there's no, if you're waiting, you don't need to not be doing anything. And that waiting creates a lot of anxiety and worry for families too, that we're trying to address. We're also a great fit for families who, maybe don't want that more structured, option, and they've tried it and it's not for them, or maybe they just can't support it because of their work schedules or financially they can't support it. Or also just families that want to use the app alongside their child's other resources. Like you mentioned, they might still have an in-home therapy option or, go to a special school during the day, but there are still lots of things that mom and dad or grandma, or even, for some of our clients, siblings can help, work on, with kids in the evenings and on the weekends.
How long has Happy Ladders been around, and what kind of impact are you seeing it having?
We started building Happy Ladders in summer of 2021, and we built an MVP that we've been using for the last 6 to 9 months. We've just finished a pilot with a nonprofit, Autism Belize, a smaller country with very limited access to services, so they were ideal for us, very involved parents who very much wanted to help their children. And we started building development on our mobile app in December. And so that is, we're right in the middle of that right now and looking for a launch in Q2.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you are very much of a startup.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think we're considered an early startup.
Very, very early stage.
Very early stage.
Yeah, a pre-stage. What we're learning is that parents are very capable. And, one of my main goals with Happy Ladders is to be available, when a worried mom is Googling late at night after a rough day with her toddler, knows that she needs some sort of support, but doesn't exactly know what that looks like or where to find it. And I want her to be able to find us, at 10 o'clock at night and sign up and be able to have something that she can do with her child the next morning. And, start to impact some change, some real change, and also really start to address her anxiety and her level of worry. But I think more than anything is to empower parents to realize that they don't have to wait on the professionals. And the professionals in our field are amazing. There's a lot of really great people doing really great stuff, but they aren't available to all the kids that need them. And, not all the people that are available are amazing. So, at the very least, to create a good foundation where parents feel empowered and they don't feel, completely dependent on the professionals is really what we're hoping to do and what we're seeing happen.
So in other words, we're trying to bring flow to their lives. Park.
That's an inside, not a joke, but an inside story, isn't it, Sean? So you better let our listeners know what you're talking about.
Well, Park, if you recall, that was the narrative thread that you came up with that ran through the Blue River and Mura platform story that was so useful. And as you know, I kind of dove deep on that idea. And that's where I discovered a lot of overlap with Amy's work. Was this concept of all the behavioral stuff that's involved there. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't stopped thinking about it since we started that many years ago. Like I literally think about how to deliberately create flow every single day in all these different aspects. Happy Ladders is one of them, because that's really one of the gifts that you gave to me, was learning about that and how to actively create that for yourself in order to, in my opinion, and I guess in Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's opinion also, to live a meaningful life, right? And so, man, it's just played such a big role for us in this process to focus on alleviating that anxiety and that sense of being overwhelmed for parents, and giving them this opportunity to feel like they are in control and they're not at the mercy of things outside of themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It totally does, because you can only imagine how difficult it would be to, have a child that's learning development, that they're working on autistic. I mean, it's just a whole new thing thrown in your life that you love them dearly, I'm sure. And now you're like probably a bit in survival mode. And Amy, correct me on this, but my guess would be like, okay, we've got this situation. Oh my God, what do we do now? And of course, when we're in survival mode, that's no fun. No. I mean, we're not thinking straight. It's exhausting. It's scary as hell. And so it sounds like what you're doing, and Sean, like you're saying, is you're trying to bring a little bit more flow into their life and say, look, we can arm you and equip you with some more knowledge that you can actually understand in this crazy world, and help you do some things with your child to help them develop. And I suppose they can see the progress. They have some hope in this particular platform. Is that why you call it Happy Ladders? Is it moving up the ladder of development and everybody's happy in this process?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think in some ways it's interesting, because I think there's that experience that, and I'm just inferring this because we're not parents with a child on autism spectrum. But my understanding from Amy's experience is that it's not wholly like those moments, as a startup, when you're like, when you feel completely overwhelmed and isolated and you don't know what to do next. And sometimes just the smallest reinforcement, the smallest thing, can help keep us going. Like, okay, cool. I can take a breath now. I can keep moving because I got that small bit of progress that helped clarify my mission.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're really trying to establish.
We've got a way forward.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we're really trying to establish flow for parents within the app too. So it's very much self-paced, but figuring out, applying these behavioral concepts to parents just as much as we do to kids, right? Because we apply them to ourselves, just like through, this concept of flow and how do you get to a point where you have some good momentum? It's not too hard. It's not too easy. You're on a good trajectory and you're moving at a good pace. And that pace can change, right? At first, it might be really slow relative to where you can go later. But in the beginning, that's as fast as you can go. And so that's where you find your flow. And so really applying that to the app and the support that we give parents, because if parents are in flow and if parents feel successful and they're moving at a good pace, then all of that energy is going to be directed toward their child, and their child will then in turn do well, So I think that is where, that idea of flow and momentum is just so important, because that's when we feel balanced, right? When we get out of that state of, emergency mode and feel like, okay, we have things mostly under control, as controlled as things can be while you're raising children.
Mostly under control. I like that.
Our houses, some days are better than others, but for the most part, we feel like we things are moving in the right direction, and that's really what we want for our families too.
Two quick questions for you, Amy, and then we're going to dive into how you are both using storytelling to grow happy ladders. Question number one, you mentioned earlier that autism is on the rise. Why is that?
Well, that's $1 million question. I am not the best one to answer that question, and I don't know that anyone has a clear answer. There's been changes in the diagnostic criteria, over the last 5 or 10 years. That has changed things. We are looking at a much wider spectrum of kids that are getting an autism diagnosis that might have not gotten an autism diagnosis 10 or even 20 years ago when I first started in the field. And that's a good thing in a lot of ways, because there's kids that may have not qualified for services in the past, but do now. And we know that kids who receive early intervention services and parents who receive early intervention support do much better throughout the course of their lives. I'm trying to think if there's any other.
Do kids get misdiagnosed with autism? Does that happen often?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. You're going to get me in trouble here, Park.
Not at all. It's just an open conversation.
Do kids get misdiagnosed? I think that there are probably some diagnoses that kids get. We use the word provisional. Sometimes younger siblings of kids who have autism, younger siblings will get an autism diagnosis because they are showing some need, but it's because of that older sibling and that family connection that they might get a diagnosis. In my view, what that does is it just helps kids access services that they might need. So if they need speech therapy, if they need occupational therapy, if they need ABA, it gets them access to that sooner. And if they don't need it, then they don't need it and they get exited out. There's no harm.
I think there's a flip side of that too that's interesting, in that kids that may not be diagnosed, I certainly, in my personal experience, I've seen situations where there was not a diagnosis. And then I think the lack of a diagnosis, and as much as people hate labels and things like that, it can also obfuscate certain aspects of a person's personality, or I don't even know how to describe it. Personality is not the right word.
Just some significant needs.
Yeah, and then they get lumped in and not giving that grace that maybe they should be getting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we see that a lot with kids who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD as well, right? As if things go undiagnosed and the supports aren't put in place, then kids, unfortunately, get into situations where it gets really hard for them, and professionals don't necessarily, know how to help. So, I mean, early intervention, early diagnosis, like I said, it's not harmful. If anything, kids get to a point where they don't need a certain level of support anymore, and they get exited, and that's always a great thing too.
That's great. And you had mentioned at the very beginning of the show, Amy, that you were on the app and you were answering some questions, helping some parents through some things. What are the kinds of questions that are most asked of you through the app? What are people struggling with the most?
Parents have lots of questions about particular lessons. So most of the questions that come through the app are, questions pertaining, specifically to the lessons, or wanting to celebrate when their child has, mastered or gained that skill, and that they're, moving on to the next one. Parents often ask questions about behaviors. So that's a big one. Tantrums and meltdowns are a hot topic with children that have autism. And a lot of that is due to communication deficits. So if kids can't express their wants and their needs, then their frustration, as any of us, can understand, starts to increase. And so sometimes there's some behavioral fallout from that. And so we help parents address that.
So we help the kids find flow.
Well, yeah.
By being able to communicate.
Yes. Sure. Sean's going to overuse that flow concept here.
Because what you're talking about is that
it's a great singular narrative here, helping,
But it's it's true, because if the kid is feeling overwhelmed by this, inability to communicate what they need to communicate, then of course these things are going to happen. And so you get them, the parent can help get them back into flow by developing these skills.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we love about the way that we've approached Happy Ladders is it's an early intervention platform. And so we're hoping to, like I said, attract parents who are either worried about their kids and starting to see signs of, them having some developmental needs, or kids who have been recently diagnosed, so that we can catch them before, and we can help parents give those communication tools in this instance before they get to a point where their child is tantruming pretty significantly, because that can quickly throw a family back into, kind of survival mode, and really start to throw off some major home routines and sleep and all sorts of stuff. So we hope to get them into flow before they're even out of it, if that makes sense.
And how are you using storytelling to do that?
I can tell you how I've interpreted what Sean's taught me. And I can say that I have not always been the best student. When we first started to go through a lot of the story brand exercise, I was completely frustrated. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of really hard.
It's complicated. It can be complicated, right?
Yeah. And you just want to put your website together and say, we sell this. Why isn't that good enough? And I quickly realized why that's not good enough. And I get it now. And I think Sean's seen me come around over the last couple of years. But yeah, that was a really hard concept for me to learn, because it's very gray, and I'm in this field. I'm in the behavioral field for a reason. I like things that are specific and measurable and observable. And storytelling does not always feel that way, although it is that way. There are some really hard concepts embedded, firm concepps embedded within it. But
like the ABT, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. So we realized this morning while we were talking with you, Park, is that the ABT actually follows the structure of the ABC model within behavior analysis. And the ABC model stands for antecedent behavior consequence. So it's basically like your before, during, and after.
Classic 3-part structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I've learned how to use storytelling in how I sell Happy Ladders to parents, how I sell Happy Ladders to organizations, and then how I talk about Happy Ladders in the event that we're talking to a potential investor. And those 3 stories are similar, but very different. Having a framework for storytelling has been really helpful.
Can you share a story that you might, share with one of those audiences you just mentioned? Let's take a family, a parent.
Well, actually, I got a better one. So what is an investor story? So we talked to one of the first investors we talked to probably not quite a year ago. She asked us, she goes, give me your quick 3-minute elevator pitch. We're like, okay, cool. And then we realized over an hour later, we were still talking. And that was when you're like, wow, we really stubbed our toe there pretty badly. She was very gracious and very, very nice and let us go for whatever reason. Not really sure why. But She did, and we ended up in an accelerator with her. Her company provides one locally, and she really, Amy ended up, I ended up putting her on the spot since she's the CEO. She's the one that had to do all the pitch, stuff and everything. So she really helped us whip our story into shape very quickly. But that was like one of the most egregious examples that I have of that. And it still amazes me today, like even after all these years and, listening to your podcast for years and going through this process with you. And I've gone through the story cycle process a couple times now, that it still is one of those things where you go like, no, you just don't, it just doesn't always stick.
Do you have an ABT for us?
I do, actually. I wrote a couple before the show. So,
all right. Well, let's try this. And because this is a really great example, and Amy, going back to your very analytical mind, and people could understand certainly why that would be in your line of work, storytelling is actually measurable in a lot of different ways. I mean, especially online when you can measure engagement, you see it go through the roof. When you do an A/B testing on a LinkedIn post that doesn't use narrative structure and one that does, like the ABT, you can see it increase 400, 500, 600% in engagement.
Yep.
So there are ways to actually build an ROI around these storytelling frameworks versus just rambling on and on and on, Sean, like maybe you were talking about with the investor. Yeah. And we've all been there, by the way, right?
Yes, of course. It's hard not to.
All right, so let's hear your ABT and have some fun with
it.
Right, what are we doing?
So I have two. The first one is a little bit more straightforward, because I wanted to get your feedback on the two because they're slightly different approaches. The first one goes like this: the rate of autism diagnosis has increased from 1 in 10,000 in 2000 to as high as 1 in 24 in 2023, including a 300% increase in the last 5 years. But there simply aren't enough professionals available to meet the increasing demand. Therefore, we created Happy Ladders to empower parents to teach essential developmental skills themselves through play and daily routines.
All right. I'm just making some notes here. That's awesome. Okay, well done. Now, you know me, Sean. Here's what I would do in this circumstance. I'd ask you, who is your audience for this?
It's parents with a child at risk of or with an autism diagnosis.
Okay, so this is parent. How can you incorporate them, the parent, using the old pronoun shift of actually the word you, and you meaning your audience? How can you place them at the very beginning of that ABT in your and statement of agreement? You've got this shared vision of what you all want to have tomorrow. So what would be, in this case, a positive shared vision? Now, we understand it's on the rise. There's not enough professionals to go around. Therefore, you're helping mitigate that gap with the Happy Ladders online platform.
Right.
So as a parent, what is it that I want for my child relative to what your platform has to offer?
Parents, first and foremost, want their kids to be happy. I think if I had to answer for a parent, they want them to be independent and have friends. Have relationships, right? Meaningful relationships with family members and friends and teachers.
Okay.
I think one thing is they want to see them fulfill their potential.
Let me ask you this then. I'm going to just kind of wing this one because it's just coming off the top. So what I might recommend, I'd have you relook at that ABT and write it from the parent's perspective. Right now you've got it written as just an overall general numbers, which are startling and scary and oh my God, but let's keep those for the but statement. Let's paint a brighter picture for that parent. You're a loving, caring parent of an autistic child. And if you have access to the proper professional development for your child, then they stand a much greater chance of living happier, healthier lives to fulfill their unique potential. But it's increasingly difficult to be able to get into these programs because autism has increased by your percentage points and there are simply not enough professionals to go around. Therefore, you can begin having an immediate impact on helping your child fulfill their potential with our platform called Happy Ladders. That does bidding. And then you fill in the final features of what it does. But what essentially we're trying to do here, and thank you for your patience through my pauses, you're a caring parent who has, an autism diagnosis for your child. And if you can, as quickly as possible, get the professional development they require, then they have a much better chance of living a happier, healthier, more fulfilling life. But those professionals are hard to come by these days because autism is on such a rise. And then you throw in a couple of numbers right there. Therefore, you can have that start having that immediate impact now with Happy Ladders that does this. So that's where my brain goes first with that particular ABT. How does it play for you, too?
It works. I'm just going to take that and go put that on our website.
And you can push back as well, right? So, Amy, how does something like that play where we're starting with the positive? This is what you want for your child, but you can't. It's harder to get now because of access to professional development. Therefore, you can start having that immediate impact with Happy Ladders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I think a lot of parents, if they were to read that, would identify with those first couple statements, and that would, obviously keep them reading, right? So you lock them in, with the statement that's accurately empathetic or sympathetic to what they're going through.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. We have found that when we are actually crafting ABTs, and Sean, you know this, when you're writing them, it's always good to start with your problem statement. What is the one problem? What's that one singular narrative about the problem that I'm going to address in this ABT? In this case, it's access to professional development because there's that linking cause word, because autism is, increasing, rapidly increasing. Okay, if that's our problem statement, let's set that up with that and statement of agreement. What can we all agree on? You're a loving, caring parent of a child that has an autism diagnosis, and if you can get access to that professional development, then you have a better chance of them living that life. All right, great. That's right. That's our setup. That's our scene one, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then, but you don't have that access. Therefore, here we're going to give you that access. So it all really kind of comes around, in this case, sort of that access word as your singular narrative to get through that. Or it could be fulfillment. It could be these other things. But you want access. You don't currently have access. We're going to give you access.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly.
And that's kind of the mental gyrations we go through on that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Park. Your reframing of that, one thing that I noticed that I did is it's just so easy to flip back into old habits, which is making your product or your business the hero of the story, which I did not intentionally do that. I was actually trying to put the parents at the center of it, but because it was at the end of the ABT, it changed the context dramatically.
Yeah, you want to put them right up top. Yep. So this is a story about them. Your story is about them. Yep. You come in as Happy Ladders as the brand at the very end, the second part of that therefore statement. You play, of course, that more important role of mentor guide in their journey with what they're going through. Talking about a hero's journey, oh my God, you are a parent, you have this beautiful baby, and then so your world right there is already changed, and then you get the diagnosis. Oh my God, talking about moving you from your ordinary world into Campbell's extraordinary world and all the trials and tribulations you have to fight to go through that. But if you are there as their mentor or guide, then you are helping them find the flow in a very, very chaotic situation so that they can have really, I guess, first and foremost, their better peace of mind for themselves so that because you're equipping them to be helpful. And then they can take their kids through the program. They can start seeing this developmental, landmarks happening as they go. So they can get excited about that, and they get leveled up as then, of course, the child, the ultimate customer here, is getting the absolute best care they can from a parent standpoint because you are helping them, educating them, inspiring them to do just that.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right. Well said.
Yes. Beautiful.
Great. So, Amy, now, Sean and I have sat down. We spent quite a long time together, Blue River and Mira, going through all this and working through the frameworks, and he's done the story cycle system and that. You now seeing the and, but, therefore, and how it works, How do you see that you could incorporate even that simple, basic 3-word framework into more of the communication and more of the work and maybe even more of the play, education and development you're doing with parents and their kids?
I think your Instagram post is actually a perfect opportunity for that. She's been doing some of these overview of some of the lessons and activities that are in Happy Ladders, and I share some of those things with parents. And I think that teeing it up with the ABT would be very effective.
Yeah. And I'll have to use the ABT as I'm coming up with that. Instagram's interesting because you get like 90 seconds at most. And that's even if somebody wants to listen to you that long, right? And I realize that I'm probably not the most interesting person to listen to either. So I think, I've been successful with just picking one topic. Does your child do this? Are you running into issues with that? Coming at it from the parent's perspective, I think is really helpful. And I, that's kind of the journey that we've been on this last couple of years. First, initially with our, with the blog, which is at parent-led.com, parent-led.com, is really trying to understand what that parent's journey looks like. As a professional, I spent a lot of time on the business end, hiring and training and developing programs and assessing individual children. And what I've really loved about the last couple of years is that I've been able to flip and really study the parent's journey. And I do a lot of that through social media and just, pay attention to what parents are asking other parents, what they're saying, where they're struggling. And social media has actually been a mostly great thing, I think, for parents of children, especially who are newly diagnosed, because they need that community. These moms especially, and dads, but mainly moms just didn't have anyone to talk to, didn't have a community unless they happened to know a couple moms at the preschool drop-off, or had a small group within their town that they met with. But these moms on social media have these huge communities that they form. And so it's been really neat. And some of these moms have kind of let me in too, to really study what that parent journey looks like, to really understand it so that I'm not just coming at it from I'm the professional and here's what we do, but understanding what they're looking for and what they're needing and coming through that. So I think, using that but therefore in that, with that framework, what are parents looking for? How can you access their needs, not the child's needs? How can you, access the parents' needs could be really
well, and that's what the ABT makes you do. It really makes you think from your audience's perspective, your in this case, your parents' perspective. Mm-hmm. What do they want relative to your offering, and why is that important to them? But why don't they currently have it? Therefore, how you can help them get it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really what we ultimately boil it down. And Amy, you can have a lot of fun on Instagram and your other social media using the ABT. It's a perfect place for it. From everything from writing, the comments and the notes in your Instagram post, the actual content, to if you're doing videos and you want a really quick, hard-hitting video in under 20 seconds, you can use the ABT to do that. Okay. The idea here, too, is even in longer-form communication, where people will tend to turn us off, and we've got this, attention economy we're all dealing with right now. The ABT has this way of locking into that limbic brain, that subconscious brain of the setup problem resolution dynamic. And the fact that you mentioned that you focus on one issue at a time is brilliant, because that's storytelling. Sometimes we get lost in the weeds and we have 9 different narratives going on at one time, and we are just completely confusing our audience. But when you get it boiled down to that singular narrative, that one problem you were, detailing or solving for that audience in your ABT, that's where the secret sauce is. That's where the sweet spot is.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting there slowly but surely. I think we're figuring that out.
Where can people learn more about you all and what you're doing?
HappyLadders.com. And as Amy said before, parent-led.com.
And remind us, parent-led.com is different from Happy Ladders. How?
Parent-led.com is the parent-led revolution blog that I started during COVID. And like I said, it was the beginning of Happy Ladders, but it wasn't intentional, and it wasn't something that either of us realized at that time. I was trying to, give parents some everyday, like I said, jargon-free information that they didn't have to wait on the professionals to give them.
Well, especially during COVID, because lockdowns and everything, that was a tough time.
Yeah. So parents that were used to having professionals in their home day after day, those people stopped coming and they didn't have the skill. No, they weren't prepared. They didn't have the skills to work with their children on their own. And so, yeah, very much influenced by that shift and understanding that there were many parents struggling to.
Yeah. And then Happy Ladders is just the platform that we created out of that big idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting to me how storytelling scales. So where you weren't intending, it sounds like, to have Happy Ladders come out of this, but by you being the main storyteller around this on parent-led.com, that took on a life of its own, it sounds like. And now it's like, we have to help deliver them a utility of something that they can work from. Now that they're getting all this great content, how can they physically do something about this?
Yeah. I give Sean, the credit for all of that, because I did not see the long game there. But obviously, with his experience with storytelling and with content marketing, he really, helped build a good platform. And we talk about the parent-led revolution, or the parent-led revolutionary. So what does that look like? It's a parent that takes a seat at the table, or that the head of their, table with all the professionals, and they see themselves as the equal partner, and they can understand, what people are talking about, and that they understand their child, that they are the primary expert in their child, and that they can make decisions for themselves and their families, and they don't have to be so dependent.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the platform. I mean, very, very important. You're doing some great work, and I can't wait to circle back with you two in a few months to hear about some of the other stories and the impact you're having, because I'm certain it's going to make a huge difference in these people's lives. So congrats for doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Park.
Yep. Thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what you heard, or if you know a family member, friends, colleagues, whomever that might be dealing with autism in their home and trying to figure it out, then by all means share this episode with them and send them over to happyladders.com. They can check it out. And I guess that leads to one last question for you two. What do you go to the platform and do you sign up? Do you register? Is there a cost for it, or how do they access it immediately?
Yep, it's just a SaaS-based platform. They can go sign up on our website and get access today.
Awesome. All right. So check that out. Share this episode, with anyone you know that you think could really benefit from the Happy Ladders program. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. And if you want to be crafting your own ABTs as excellently as Sean did earlier today, you see how all this stuff comes together, visit me at businessofstory.com/ABT, and you can take our quick online course there to get the ball rolling with this messaging marvel in your life. And until next week, when we'll have another story artist right here for you, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that's a great one. Thanks so much for listening.